pursuit of freedom, boldly telling the truth in a time of universal deceit.
Mr. Griffin, thank you for being a guest on Pursuit of Freedom. You are one of my heroes of the liberty movement.
Oh, well, thank you, Phil. I appreciate that.
I discovered a YouTube video of a lecture you gave titled More Deadly Than War, produced in 1969. I watched the whole series of videos and I realized that I am an eyewitness to one of the Marxist tactics targeting Hispanics. Back in the late 60s, I lived in a small town along the Texas-Mexican border. The elementary school I went to held an annual Halloween parade, and one year a group of Hispanic men dressed like a paramilitary unit from a banana republic, uninvited, marched in the school parade. They were members of La Raza Unida. It shocked the parents and my mother, who still talks about the event with emotion. A few years later, the La Raza Party gained control of the governments of several small South Texas towns, including my hometown, and proceeded to bankrupt them with corruption. Is that infiltration of minority communities still a significant part of the collectivist takeover plan?
I think it is, Phil. You don't read much about it in the newspaper. It's certainly back page stuff now compared to what it was back in those days. But yes, the classical Marxist strategy for changing society bit by bit until finally that you have what they would call a communist society is very much with us. And I think it's important to know that even though it's a classical Marxist strategy, it also is practiced by other groups that want to change America in that direction. The Marxists are not the only ones playing this game. As a matter of fact, the La Raza movement has been funded to a huge extent by forces that we would probably consider to be capitalist. In other words, the Ford Foundation is perhaps the greatest provider of funds, maybe next to the federal government itself, for the La Raza movement, or any movement that would tend to disrupt the social fabric of America and divide it, to reduce its strength, and to weaken it, and to make it more malleable as a nice, quiet, passive, controllable unit of this new world order that they keep talking about. So, but you're absolutely right. It is a classical Marxist strategy. It's very much active today, but we mustn't forget it's that same strategy is being used by people that are not Marxists as well, but they do have the same goal.
The current mayor of San Antonio's mother was a member of La Raza. She stirred up quite a controversy recently that made national news. She mocked and ridiculed the heroes of the Alamo. Isn't that amazing? The mayor of San Antonio's mother saying such a thing. It really seems like they try to stir up trouble.
Well, that's their job, is to cause trouble. And the strategy really is one of moving the thinking and the reality of America very gradually to the left, or at least toward the direction of totalitarianism, through a process in which they create boogeymen that are so obnoxious and so frightening to the American people, that when they finally come along and offer somebody who is still wanting to do the same thing but not so obnoxious, then everybody floods to them as the compromise candidate or the compromise position. They never expected to get all the way in the first place, but they thought that if they could have somebody so frightening advocating this kind of revolutionary movement, then the people would gladly accept somebody who was more moderate. And so the nation will move in that direction for now, and then the next year they have somebody else even more frightening, and then it moves a little bit halfway in that direction. And it's a strategy whereby they don't expect to get everything that they want, but their object is to frighten the people into believing that somebody who is equally revolutionary, but somehow they believe that he's a moderate because he's not as extreme as these other people.
I see that dynamic playing out in the national election. I've been a political activist in the Republican Party for nearly 2 decades, and it's like a relay race towards tyranny. The Republicans take the baton, then hand it off to the Democrats, back and forth, always heading in the same direction.
Yes, exactly. And it's not an accident. It's a very well calculated strategy.
My next question is about a serious issue right here in San Antonio. The Northside Independent School District, one of the largest in Texas, is implementing a mandatory RFID chip program allowing the school to track every student. The officials have made it clear they intend this program to go statewide. It's made national news. Have you heard about it?
Oh yes, and it's quite ubiquitous. It's not just there. It's in many school districts across the United States, and the ones that haven't yet announced it are working on it. And you find it not just in the United States. It's very evident in England right now, and in other European countries. This is just part of the rapid, I was going to say drift. It's more of a run toward totalitarianism, in which the state is all powerful. You know, it used to be in this country that we considered the government to be made up of servants of the people. They were working for us. We told them what to do. That was how it was 100 years ago. But now, of course, it's completely turned around. It's the government telling us what to do and supposedly doing it for our own good. But nevertheless, we now serve the state. And in order to do that, they have to control us. They have to know where we are, what we're doing. They have to know who the potential troublemakers are. And so therefore, so much of what the governments around the world are doing is to find ways to track us and to monitor our activities and to monitor our thoughts even, to monitor with whom we associate, what we do, how we spend our money, what are our opinions on this, that, and the other thing, because they need to control society.
Oh yes, I see that in action here. San Antonio is very much a military-industrial complex town. The military is the biggest landowner in the county. They have built a giant fusion center a few miles from my home that I must admit gives me the creeps driving by it. Can you give me your thoughts on this Orwellian surveillance grid that seems to be becoming a reality?
Well, it is becoming a reality. And as I said a moment ago, it's not just there. These fusion centers are certainly a very high-profile example of it. I became aware of this sort of thing years ago, back in the 1960s, when we thought here in America that the only problem we had to face was communism. We didn't realize that we were actually building that same type of system right here. But we didn't know that, and we were focused on what was happening to these poor people who were behind the Iron Curtain, living under communism. And I remember talking to refugees from behind the Iron Curtain, and one or two that came out of Cuba. And it was just horrible to think that they had block captains. In every block, they had at least one person, and sometimes as many as 3 or 4, whose sole job was to spy on everybody else in the block. And if they did anything that looked the least bit suspicious, they were required to report that activity to their regional leaders, and it all filtered up. And it was a horrible system. You couldn't cut your grass without somebody reporting it, to the central authorities. And I kept thinking at the time, boy, I'm sure glad it's not that way in America. And now, lo and behold, all these years later, we are exactly building the same thing, except now we have much more technology. And it's not just a block captain that's looking out the window, see who visited you after dinner, and reporting that, but they've got ways of monitoring your emails, your, what programs you watch on television. They're building cameras into your computers and in your television sets that monitor you and listen to you. It's much more draconian than it was in the days when communism was the big threat.
The added element of advanced technology is very frightening in the hands of these tyrants. All over San Antonio, I see cameras all hooked to a city central control center, and that can be easily linked nationally. I couldn't do an interview with you, sir, without talking about our deeply troubled dollar. I just read that economist John Williams predicted a massive dollar sell-off and hyperinflation by 2014. Do you think America will experience a Weimar Germany-like currency collapse that soon?
Well, I'm very bad at making short-term predictions. I guess every short-term prediction I've made, with few notable exceptions, have been wrong. But I'm very good at long-term predictions because, it's a lot easier when you can stand back and see where the forces of history are driving it. It's like trying to predict what the stock market is going to do next week. Well, I think a person would be a fool to try and predict that unless they had some very accurate inside information. But you can certainly predict what the stock market will do on a 5-year or 10-year period, because you've got the history of it that you can go to, and you can analyze the forces. If the forces don't change, then the history is going to repeat. So it's the same way with the monetary system. There's no doubt in my mind that the United States is losing its currency. The purchasing power of the dollar is going to diminish to zero. And that means a Weimar Republic type of inflationary period, yes. But the thing that we don't know is how long it will take. In fact, I thought it would have happened a long time ago. But for some reason, the bubble keeps expanding and expanding. And I don't know when it's going to burst. One of the things that has made the United States a little bit different than and help it to stand apart from this historical trend is that when nations in the past have debauched their currency, it's affected only them. But in the case of the United States, the dollar has been the reserve currency of the world, which means that other nations whose local monetary systems are even worse than ours have had to accept dollars, or they've wanted to accept dollars because their own money was even worse. And so no matter how much we created here through the Federal Reserve, no matter how many dollars we created out of nothing, it seemed like there was somebody in the world that still wanted them because they could use them to advantage. Well, now that's coming to an end. More and more countries are abandoning the dollar, and some big countries like China, they don't want to deal with dollars anymore. And so the Federal Reserve System is increasingly having to create more and more money to make up the deficit, whereas in the past, foreigners were buying our debt. Now they're not doing that anymore. So now the Federal Reserve is creating money at a rate faster than ever before. It's just mind-boggling. Nothing like this has ever occurred before in history. And so it's definitely the dollar is going down. There's no question. But now the other issue comes to play. What are they going to do about it? The people that are calling the shots internationally as well as nationally have a long-range plan. And that is not just to stand by and let the dollar sink into oblivion. What they want to do is replace the dollar before that happens. They want to replace it with some other fiat currency. It won't be much different, but Americans will think it will be. But their plan is to replace it first with a regional currency, very much like the euro is a regional currency for the European Union. They have a plan that's been on the books for a long time to create a North American Union, very much like the European Union, but it would consist of an amalgamation of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And if they can pull that off, as they feel confident they can, then there would be a regional currency called the Amero. And Americans will think, oh, my goodness, we've got a new currency. This one is going to be a lot better than that terrible dollar because, look, the dollar doesn't buy anything anymore. So they'll gladly embrace the new currency because they will be propagandized into thinking that it's going to be good, not realizing that it's also a fiat currency, the same as the dollar. But basically, they're going to kick the problem can down the road a little bit, and it'll be another maybe 5 or 10 years before people realize that the Amero is really also worthless. And then the ultimate plan, of course, and we finally come to this, is to create a true international currency that will be accepted everywhere in the world. It probably will be called the Bancor. Not certain, of course, but that's the name they like to use so far. And at that point, there would be no escape. Today, if you've got your wealth tied up in dollars and the dollar is losing value, you can say, well, maybe the yen is doing better, or the Deutschmark or whatever. You can go to some other currency, or you can go to gold or silver and try and escape that. But if they ever get this true international currency in place, then there'd be no escape. And I'm sure at that point, the politicians will do their best to declare gold and silver to be illegal also, unless it's held by the elite, unless it's held by the banks, and some of the large corporations. So anyway, it's a pessimistic picture, isn't it, Phil? And I think that's where we're headed. How long it will take to get there, though, is the big question. I just have no idea, but I have a feeling, even though I'm going to be 81 years old in about 2 weeks, I have a feeling I'm probably going to see all of this happen in my lifetime.
I share that same opinion that we are near a major event. I'm not shocked that it's happening, but I am shocked about how fast it's taking shape. My next question fits in with what we've been discussing so far about the emergence of a global government. Republican candidate Connie Mack said the United Nations should be kicked off American soil. I don't take Republicans seriously when they talk about getting out of the UN. However, do you think there is growing support for that to happen?
Yes, I do. I think there is growing support. But the question is it growing fast enough to be meaningful? I'm encouraged by it. The first book I ever wrote was published back in 1964, I guess it was. It was called The Fearful Master, A Second Look at the United Nations. So I kind of cut my teeth on these world problems from the perspective of what the United Nations was doing and what its goal was. And I have watched it grow over those years from some kind of a little helpless, pathetic forum for tin-horn dictators to come and give speeches and spend their taxpayers' dollars in expensive hotels in New York and all of that. Now, of course, it has its expanded peacekeeping forces. It has a budget. It's talking about ways to tax all the nations of the world through the internet. It's gradually being built into a true world government. And the closer it gets to that goal, the more easy it is to recognize. And the more easy it is to recognize, I think the more people will be alarmed because they're not going to like what they see. There's nothing wrong with world government if it's based on the principles of individual freedom and respect for others. But if the world government is based on the principles of collectivism, which means all power at the top, the state is in supreme control, and the people must serve the state. If that's what the type of government is being created, it becomes obvious, and people are seeing that now, and they're resisting it. So back to your question, is it becoming obvious? Yes, I think it is. Is it a positive move? Yes, it is. The big question is, will it happen fast enough before we turn over all of our weapons and our military to it under the false name of disarmament? Everybody's thinking, oh, disarmament is good. They don't realize that what they're really talking about is not disarmament, but transfer of armaments from the nations to the international body at the UN. Once that happens, then it won't make any difference what your opinion is about it. They'll have the weapons and you will be the slave.
Without a doubt, that's the goal the UN has. When I saw the sculpture of the handgun with a twisted barrel next to the UN building, I saw it as a graphic representation of their intent to disarm us in order to bring about a totalitarian world government. The UN is a very hot topic in Texas right now. Our state attorney general has warned the UN poll watchers they will be arrested if they violate state election law. People are really upset. I hope that leads to us finally getting out of the UN.
Yes, I do too.
Could you share with our listeners some resources you suggest for those who want to learn more about these topics?
Well, yes. In fact, we try and create those resources, Phil. The website for realityzone.com is our commercial site, and we have approximately 100, maybe a little bit more than 100 books, videos, and audio recordings dealing with these topics. And I urge any person who wants to become a student of that and get up to speed, that's where they should start, is looking at those materials. Also, we have a free newsletter, I guess you'd call it. It's a news service. It's called Unfiltered News. And we monitor the news every day, and we update it at least 4 times a week. As a matter of fact, tonight's my homework night. I've got to prepare this for release tomorrow, a new edition. And I urge anybody that wants to get behind the news and see what what's really happening. We call it unfiltered because, a lot of times when you read the news stories, the facts are there, but they're presented in such a way that it's easy to miss them or to misinterpret them. And so our job is to unfilter it and make sure that you understand what's really happening just by reading the headline. It's not an easy thing to do, but we've been at it now for, I guess about 8-9 years, and we're getting pretty good at it. So I urge anybody that wants to get that free subscription to go to therealityzone.com, and you'll find an icon there with a guy reading a newspaper. Just click on it and enroll in Unfiltered News.
I know you are a busy man, very much in demand for your wisdom. I thank you for taking time to be a guest on Pursuit of Freedom.
Well, thank you, Phil. Thanks for inviting me.
The Pursuit of Freedom, the show for people ready to take back their republic.